Hi everyone, welcome. I'm Allison. Thank you for joining me for where I'm from, number 80. 80 with Mike Burton, whose podcast Genuine Chit Chat I've been lucky enough to be on a few times, more than a few times. And he'll be joining me momentarily. What have you been reading? I read Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis, which I've heard lots of amazing things about, and it did not it after reading The Bell Jar because it covers a lot of the same time and a lot of the same stuff, but this is a novel, and so the ending's very different. Hello, Mike.
Hello there. How is it going? Can you hear me okay?
I can. Your
Wonderful.
background, as usual, is stupendous.
Yeah, it's got my podcast logos, got the two there, which in this they're mirrored and things, and I'm not quite used to it because I've pretty much never done live broadcasts, so this is my first. So I must admit, I'm actually a little bit nervous, but I always turn nervousness into excitement. You know, the kind of biological feelings are the same. So I really try to, but this angle is not nice on me at all. The hay fever has been killing me today, and I was like, maybe I'll get away with it, but I have not been able to elevate this enough at all. But I've got tissues on standby, but I'm hoping I don't start sneezing halfway through a poem. But
That is why I invested in a ring light for that very thing, for just these. Because it's like, I just kind of want to look a little nicer, like for me personally,
yeah,
just to me to get on every week or twice a week and just not be like, oh, okay, this is what it is, to just be a little bit like, oh, okay. So
yeah. Well,
I did it.
you are looking great, but to be
Thank
fair,
you.
in the other videos as well, you've never looked bad from what I've seen. But with me, it's like the angles, the lighting, all of it. I was like, I focus on my bookshelf. Once that's nice, then I'll focus on me. But for the time being, I'm still using my laptop as a camera, and it's like I'm gonna invest in either GoPro or something like that, like a decent-ish webcam. But I'm just like, no, I need to just my things in the background. That's my bookshelves and my DVDs around me and all that stuff. Once I've got my nest together, then I'll invest. Then people can see me a little bit better.
Yeah, well, your nest looks very good. The first time I
Thank you.
talked to you, you look like you're in a laundry room. So this is a
I was.
very okay. So you actually were in a laundry room.
That was in the flat, yeah.
So this is a massive improvement. So you're moving in the right direction, Mike. It's just
It's all good fun.
yeah. So you wrote a poem. You stepped
I
out of
did.
your comfort zone and wrote a poem to join me, and I appreciate it. I'm happy to see you.
Thank you. Yeah, it was. It's the third poem I think I've ever written outside of formal education.
Mm-hmm.
I've wrote one quite angsty poem about
Only one.
nearly. Well, maybe they're all angsty, but we'll see about this one.
This one isn't
The first
angsty.
one.
I just think generally poetry skews angsty at a certain
The first one
age.
definitely
You
was.
know.
It definitely was. So what it was like an open letter to God, and it was when I was in my most atheist mindsets,
Mm-hmm.
and a friend of mine did a poetry thing, and I went to it. I was inspired, and then I decided to write a poem, and it was like an open letter to God, saying like, how could you let all these bad things happen, and that sort of kind of standardish thinking that is not very unique, that I thought was very unique and edgy. And I performed it in front of a group of people. They all enjoyed it, my sort of age. And then my other poem was when it was a mutual friend of ours, who I think is the person who introduced us, is Tonya Todd on
Yes.
her 52 Love podcast.
Yes.
Myself and my partner Megan, we wrote poems for each other and read them on air, and my poem made Megan cry. So yeah, so I've got that's a quite a high bar. I've made it sound like I was like, oh yeah, the only two poems I've ever written or read out loud. One was at like a poetry slam little thing and at like a nice cafe, and one was on a podcast, and I made my girlfriend cry. So it's like that makes it sound like these are gonna this is like quite a higher bar, but I'm not that confident in my poetry ability.
I think your
it's
poem is
probably
wonderful,
possible.
Mike. So be confident. It's a wonderful poem. I teared up a little.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah,
So
it is. The more I read it, the more it is emotional, I notice.
mhm.
But I think it nicely, as the poems are meant to, I think that it does reflect a lot of the core elements that makes me. And that's kind of a lot of my podcast is about, and what I kind of speak about in Genuine Chit Chat, as you can see mirrored here, is that, and that I speak about the kinds of topics that are in this.
Mhm.
A lot of them do come up, and a lot of things I'm kind of discovering about myself. So even writing this was kind of an experience like that for me. Like, what am I? What do I want to convey in these sorts of things.
Yeah. Because I've listened to your podcast and been on your podcast, and I would say we know each other at this point.
Hmm. Yeah.
I, I I knew a lot of the content, but it's the way you put it together. It's the way you like
Hmm.
reveal these pieces of yourself. I think that's what's so interesting about poetry. And I love having people, I love having everyone on. It's a fun treat when it's someone I know, because then I wonder, what are they going to share? And how are they going to share it? So I knew, certain things you would probably hit on, and you did. So would you like to read it?
Yes, I will. Yes, I've been practicing before going live, so I'm hoping that I'll be able to read it well for you lovely folks that are tuning in, and obviously for yourself, Alison. So yeah, this is where I'm from. I am Mike Burton, and here we go. I am from notepads filled with notes on life for no one else to read, from eczema cream and bandages, but still I scratch and bleed. I am from the home that was too big for three and far too large for two. I am from oak trees who stand guard for centuries, unwavering in strong winds. I'm from biscuits in bed on a Sunday morning and eating far more than we should. From my late father and my lonely mother, who always tries her best. I'm from many mistakes and few apologies, those thoughts that never rest. From elbows off the table and say your please and thank yous. From agnostics who believe in something greater only when times were tough. I'm from England South and families who don't move far from their mother's house. From barbecues and fried cheese, whenever we'd please, so always. From the last words my dad said to me when laying in his bed, telling nurses how proud I made him, just moments from being dead. The brothers who showed me films far beyond my age, like Terminator and Aliens, plus Face Off with Nick Cage. As photos are boxed and taken from walls, with knickknacks in there too, I'll blow dust off these one day and show them to a few. My kids will never meet my dad, so stories will suffice, until one day we'll all be together, likely in the next life.
You did it! It was great!
Thank you. Thank you.
I figured you would talk about your dad. I had not heard that story about, I mean, maybe I had, but just the way it was framed about your dad and the last thing he said to you, that made me tear up, both when I read it and you read it. That's beautiful.
Yeah. It's intense. So the true last thing my dad ever said to me was actually that he loved me and that I loved him. It was the morning of his passing. He passed away of cancer. For anyone coming, I've spoken about it a lot on my podcast. Obviously, as you know, I'm very open about this. It was 10 years ago this year actually, and so it's 10 years this coming May. And so yeah, it was in the morning before I was going to work at an apprenticeship place I was doing, and yeah, Mum told me to go in there and things, and because obviously he was getting more and more ill. He had it for 18 months. It was the last sort of 6 months he got very bad. And then, yeah, I went in there. I said, I hugged him and said that I loved him. He said that he loved me. And then he got moved to a hospice that day. Then I went and saw him in the eve. By the time I went and saw him, he was already far too ill to communicate or anything. But they told the nurses and things, and people around had been saying how he'd been talking about me and how proud he was and all that sorts of things sort of before he kind of went. And then I went there and kind of held his hand when he wasn't able to communicate and things, and then I left and Mum stayed, and then a few hours later I got the call and went back, and that was it. But it's one of those things. It's something that I can't help but speak about because it's a core part of my personality. It's kind of what makes me this version of me. The film Inside Out does a very good job of sort of conveying those sorts of things, the sort of core memory. And it's like, it started off purely sad, and then as I've gotten older and more reflecting on it, it's kind of merged into sort of both sad and happy at the same time, because it's the worst thing that's ever happened to me, but it's the best thing that's ever happened to my character. That's a very common thing I always say, and so it really changed my perspective on how I live a lot of my life. And Dad loved all this kind of stuff, podcasting and writing. He wrote a couple of books actually. No one would have heard of them, and they're actually kind of erotic thrillers. So they're quite, in fact I've got them down here, in fact, funnily enough, and you'll see what the artwork is, just so you can, that's one of the artwork.
Right.
And there's the other one.
Well,
so
we know what it's about. We don't need to see the title. Yeah.
And yeah, there he is right there. So yeah, it's one of those, he
this
loved
photo
books,
is
he loved
almost
reading,
a mugshot.
yeah, pretty much. Yeah, there's another one, a different one.
That
That's a
one he's got a
slightly
little,
nicer one,
yeah, he's
but
got a little
that one is
expression.
like,
This one he got caught. It's like he drew the cover and they caught him or something. Like
well,
I didn't do that.
he actually was. There's a newspaper article, which I think my mum might still have the newspaper, but I've got a photo of it where it was a church near us. This is, I'm going to say a trigger warning now,
Okay.
but there's a scene in this that features sexual assault in front of a church, and it's a specific church in the city that I live in, Southampton, and it's in front of the St Mary's Church. And so the church, I think the vicar of the church or something, whoever the head of that church was, I can't remember the sect exactly. Wrote and basically said they banned it. This is horrendous. They wanted it to be got rid of. So there's a newspaper article of my dad holding, I think it was like this, and it's saying like book banned for horrendous scene in front of church and things. And it's like, and he was so proud, like quite proud of that in a certain way, because he was like, you know, that idea of like no one sort of, if no one reacts to it in certain ways, it shouldn't affect if you want to create something. And he wasn't a band. He made lots of music, all kinds of crazy. I don't want my dad just seeming like this this crazy erotic writer. You know, he was much more than that. Very much into music and knowledge and museums and things. And he just had films. So it was all these things. He just kind of did a bit of everything. And I think that's kind of rubbed off on me in a lot of ways.
Yes, and it seems like your older brothers as well introduced you to it. You've talked about that on the podcast and also in the poem that they introduced you to things. And the being too young for things resonates for me because I was way too young for so many things I was introduced to. And I look back on it now that I have children and think, wow, I was watching that at 8. That was a lot for me. Yeah, watching Purple Rain with my parents, which I don't know if people are watching this have seen Purple Rain, but there's some pretty like interesting sex scenes. And it's not really something you want to watch with your parents when you're like 9. Or whatever I was, you know. So, but
wow.
But in a way, I stand by it because we just watch sex scenes. Like now, everybody watches violence, and they get all worried about sex scenes. And I'm like, you know, like in a way, it's good to be like, I mean, sex is part of life. Erotic thrillers are part of life, Mike. You know, like there's nothing. I mean, why is it okay to watch people just get blown away all the time? But then the minute something erotic starts happening, we're like, oh. Nope. Turn away. Turn away. This is the part you need to be afraid of. You know, it's not. It's weird.
Oh yeah, I do agree with you there. I've been very open about those sorts of elements of sort of life, and it is just baffling to me that it's like a lot of the time, like sexualization of things seems to be in film and things. Obviously, there are certain showings of it which are horrendous in certain ways, but it's like when it comes to if you educate people properly, it's not such a shock, you know, and in that kind of teaching. And my parents didn't really teach me. I had a little bit about the school system, and as in our conversation about pregnancy and things, when childbirth and that sort of thing, both myself and Megan were shown like one video, and it seems like Ria, who is a bit older than us, she was shown basically just the same thing. So the education system for us for ages was just like, here's 2 videos and that's it, and then don't talk about it really. And because in England it was oddly prudish, but recently there's been a thing, and I was thinking about this the other day. Megan loves talking about this. I don't know, many Americans don't know about this, but it's a show called Naked Attraction. Have you heard about this? Has Ria told you about it at all?
I think so, but please, for those people who have not
heard. I will. And so I've seen a couple of English friends join on this, so they're going to know what I'm talking about. But Americans, a lot of them have no idea, and people across the world, not just targeting your nation.
That's okay. Go ahead and target us. We deserve
it. So it's a show that I think was on Channel 4, and it's still going. And it's like a dating show, but what it does, you get, I think it's 5 people, it might be 6, and they go behind these boards, and then a person comes out, and the boards raise up. They're completely naked behind these boards, and it raises up to just above their genitals. And then you choose which one you like the least. They go out, and then it raises again, and you see their chest, and then you eliminate another one, it goes up again, and then they're there, and then they come out, you ask a question or something, and then you go on a date with them. And the person who comes out, first of all, they're clothed, but then when the last visors go up, and the last 2 people are standing there, they are also naked as well. So it's about kind of body positivity, and in between like sections, they give you facts about sort of intrigue into some sexually transmitted diseases. Other things are just like, I remember one which is talking about vaginas and just like how normal how normal it is that they look so different, and not
Mm-hmm.
all of them look the same, and that sort of thing. And it's like
Yes.
a specific thing about the show. It's like, look at all these, and they talk about it in the show very casually. They walk up to people and say, look at her vulva, look at her labia, like, do you like that? Like, look at her, like, all kinds of parts of her. Well, no, it's just her. It's male and female.
Yes.
Sometimes you usually get a male, a boy, a man, and a woman, and usually, but they're not always heterosexual. It's often, sometimes Megan refers to it as a double Willy episode, which are her favourites, which is when you get a heterosexual female and then a homosexual male,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's just like 10. You get to see 10, technically 11 penises in those types of shows, and it's just about normalization. So I think there's a lot in British culture that a lot more people are being okay with those sorts of things, because everyone, or most people in the UK, have at least heard of Naked Attraction, and most people have seen it at least once, and it's just like you just,
that would not
dating
fly
show
here
all
at
the
all.
naked stuff.
I wish it would. I wish it would.
You can't find it. You could watch it
but I mean,
somewhere.
I can't even imagine what all the book banners would do with something like that. Like, that would just, like, because I mean, they're banning books for being pornography that are clearly not even vaguely pornographic. So so that I would just want to say, on the video thing, I was astonished that the videos for sex ed had not evolved from Ria's to yours. And this is something my husband and I talk about, because he grew up in Texas, and he actually feels like the education has actually gotten less evolved since he was a kid, because of all of the political, what do you call it? Making it political. There's a word for that, and I'm not going to come up with it. But, it's become a political issue, and people getting on school boards to ban things, and like, that was not happening in the same way. And so it was sort of just, we had similar educations from state to state, and now it varies widely, really, really widely. So because our kids here get plenty of that in California. So, but I do want to ask you about your experience writing this poem, although I know we could go on tangents for hours. I'm going to really try to keep this to 25 minutes. So I've got to stay on topic. What was it like writing this poem, Mike? What was your experience?
I mean, I do quite enjoy making things. As people who follow my podcasting career, the conversations I release and things, and I've dabbled in other works. I used to make music videos for bands. There's some YouTube videos I used to make that aren't really on there anymore. I've hidden them because they're quite cringy, really. They're just being college, being silly and stuff. So but with it was the third poem I've written, so it's not my first rodeo, but I find that with poetry, I was trying to be like it to begin with. Hey, I don't want it just to be da 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 da. But I kept finding myself doing it because I was like, because I'm not well adversed in poetry enough, and I haven't got used to all the kind of the complexities you can do. I kind of found it felt better for me and a bit safer to do it in that way. And I was like, I don't need to make it all rhyme. And then when it wasn't rhyming, I was like, it doesn't sound as fun and good. So I was like, I got about I did about 5 lines of it, and I was like, this isn't very fun, and it's making me, in other words, it was like, they're the kind of words that just stop a sentence and stop the flow. You get there's certain words, and I was just like, it wasn't working. And I was like, I'm just going to write anything that kind of works, and then I'll tweak it after. And that kind of worked. I managed to do it all in about, writing it down, about an hour and a half, but I'd been thinking really about it a lot over time and what elements I want to put in. And obviously I checked out some of your other lovely Where I'm From episodes, the one with Tonya, your first one, and I think the most recent one from last week. I've missed the Rhea one, I'm afraid. I did want to watch just loads of them. I am. I'm sorry, Rhea. Really, really sorry. I will watch it after this. I'll make an effort. But I will. But I saw there were so many cool ones. I was like, I can't just check out all of these. It's taking up too much of my time. But I was inspired by a lot of them, and I think it's very nice how you've got these people you put forward quite I don't want to say simple concept because that sounds reductive, but an easy to understand sort of template in a way of where to go, and you just kind of let them freely open themselves up in a way that they are comfortable with in the form of poetry. And obviously I really respect that, because that's in a certain way that's what my podcast is about, to loop it back to myself.
Yes, please do.
Genuine chit chat is I talk to different people relatively every episode, and it's just about all kinds of different things. I've obviously had you on my show quite a few times. We always have great conversations speaking about Reburn, and then speaking obviously about when we spoke about Elise, and then obviously I had Elise on as well, and with Rhea, all kinds of great things, but also movies and Star Wars and authors and friends of ours and podcasters and all kinds of stuff. It's pretty much any topic I've spoken about in some way, but my whole thing is I love seeing the passion of someone's eyes light up.
Mhm.
That's like my favorite thing. It is when you're speaking to someone and they're so passionate about something, and they just talk loads about this thing they love. And I always say to people, tangents are welcomed on my show. I love it. I don't like listening to things and it's like someone's about to go somewhere and then they have to bring it back. So I'm like, no, come back.
You're very good at that. And I want to mention, you are also a very good interviewer. Elise and I have talked about it, that you really take time to learn about your guests and their body of work or what the topic that you're going to discuss. And so your first line of the poem is you.
Mm-hmm.
To me, like, that's how I think of you, is so many notes that you've made, detailed notes. Do you have a notebook there, Mike?
Oh, so there's 2 completed notebooks, just fully from Star Wars comics in canon. There's one of them, and it's just a mess. There's another one here, which is for Genuine Chit Chat, the first few years of that. I've got one here on a nice little stand now, here, which is for my new Genuine Chit Chat notes. And then down here, I've got a book of prospective guests as well. And then there's also a blank one here, and one downstairs just for the TV show stuff that I do. So no, I don't really like notebooks that much. I don't.
Because I remember, I think the first time
down.
I was on, you showed me the questions that you planned to ask. And I was like, wow, okay. I felt very respected and like, wow, he's taken time. He's not just, because it might seem, if one listens to your podcast, that because of the far-ranging nature of them, that you're just kind of showing up and seeing where it leads. But you are doing that also very well prepared. So,
Thank you.
Yeah. And does anyone else in your family do that? Or was that you? The first line of your poem made me think of you, but then it made me wonder if your father or your mother or your brothers ever took copious notes that were just for them.
The thought actually started, I'm from notepads. So I'll say it again. I'm from notepads filled with notes on life for no one else to read. I kept trying to change is notepads filled with notes. I didn't like that, but I was just like, it's just, there are synonyms for it and there's other things I could have changed it to, but it was just, that is just me.
Yes.
So I found another notebook over here, actually. Just trying to get another one. But yeah, I was just, it felt right because not only just podcasting, but my dad, he used to write music, and that's where it started from. I initially started thinking about guitar cases because my dad played guitar a lot, and I just remember him always having a guitar out, and he had the case open, and we had a cat at the time who would sit in the nice little furry bit, and he'd have notes everywhere. He'd write songs and his own lyrics and all that sort of stuff. So I remember him doing that, and I found a couple of old notebooks around here which have got there was one that had his writing on. And things I thought was quite cool. I found it years later. My laptop bag is actually his old laptop bag. So my laptop doesn't really fit in it. My laptop's too small, but I like the chunkiness of it. So yeah, it was kind of to him in that way. But I was like, I didn't want to write songwriting or anything to do with guitars because that is my brother's in a couple of bands, and my dad played a lot of music. He played a charity gig on my birthday 2 months before he passed away for charity when he was ill. With cancer. He had a neck brace on. He had a crutch on stage singing with his old band that he hadn't sung with for 20, 30 years, I think. So, and it was all for charity and stuff. So I just remember the musical side of him, but I'm like, I'm not that musical. I love music, but I can't write music. So I was like, I didn't want to write guitars and things like that, or things to do with music, because then it wasn't purely me. So I was like, I need to kind of over and underthink this at the same time, but overthink it in a poetic, nice way, but underthink it as in, this is not a therapy session necessarily. Okay, this is a few minutes. It can be, but it's a few minutes of you kind of bearing your soul for someone in the way of metaphor and rhythm and wordplay. It's not a way for you to just write out. It's not like where I'm from, the dissertation. This isn't the thing I'm submitting at the last year of college or university to get me thing. So I was like, okay, strip it back. Because I have a tendency to overthink, I've overthought and over-explained this answer.
Well, I actually, before I opened your poem, thought, I wonder if it's going to be long, and it was not long. Because some of them are longer than others, of course, because I don't have any guidelines other than sending people the prompts, which were not created by me. They were created by someone named Fred first. I went back to Georgella Lyon, who wrote the original poem, and asked her, because I felt like I need to know this person's name who created these prompts. So the prompts are really the only guideline. So it could be just Mad Libs where you fill in the word, like that's completely okay. Or some people write multiple versions and combine them. I mean, there's every different way to do it, and that's part of what I love about this whole interviewing people and talking to people about it, because I think it's very liberating, because many of us hold poetry in like high esteem or think we're not poets or we're not good enough for it. But the reality is that we all are poets, and we all deserve to tell our stories. And so I get to remind myself of that every week, which is very powerful for my own storytelling.
Yeah, it's one of those. I didn't want to write it too long either, because it was, as much as I enjoyed writing this, I didn't want it to become. I just kind of tried to go with the flow in a way. I just kind of didn't try. I tried to kind of that's kind of how I've been trying to live my life really since Dad passed. It's just this kind of internal feeling of going, just kind of, I don't know, the ripples of the universe, whatever one wants to call it, intuition, that kind of thing. I just try and do that with most things I do. A lot of podcast guests I won't even reach out to for months, and I'm like, I just don't think I need to yet. And then I just randomly will at a certain point, and then they'll be like, oh, you actually got me a really good time. A lot of time I'm like, yeah, I don't know how, I just luckily do that. So with this, that's kind of the way I did it. If you said, do you want to say a speech, Mike, do you want to come on the show? You've got 2 hours. Do you want to do a speech? I would have probably submitted a 40-page essay. Probably. I almost hand wrote it, but I was like, no, if I do that, I'm going to be writing all over pages and pages and pages. Like, if I stick to a single standard font, normal way of putting it, I'll be able to keep myself in line, because I know I can be self-indulgent.
I don't think of it as self-indulgent, because you're very clear about what the parameters are, and everyone knows what they're tuning in for. I don't think you're self-indulgent. And Miss Tanya Todd just showed up, so we have to say hi.
Yes, Tanya is the reason that we know each other.
Yeah, so
and
we
also,
have to say hello.
Tanya Todd was the person who heard me have my first ever recorded poem. Yes.
That made Megan
52
cry.
Love podcast. Yes, it did. Yeah. So,
So, any last thoughts before we wrap up, Mike? Because we're gonna wrap up.
I know. I'm not used to this short form conversation. A lot of people go, "This is quite long." Jesus, normally they're a bit shorter. For me, I'm like, "This is barely getting started."
This is really just an introduction.
2 hours
with a Mike Burton conversation. So, and you already have to
Tonya
wrap.
knows. Yeah, exactly. It's like there she is. Tonya knows. Like, she's like, "Oh, well, you said the conversation would be 45 minutes, so I booked off 2 hours." So, and I said to Megan, "I was only going to be an hour." She's like, "I'll see you in like 2.5 hours." Like. Yeah, but any last words? Thank you so much for having me on, and kind of not pushing me, but allowing me to write something like this, and bare my soul in a way that I don't normally. So in a lot of ways, in such a raw format, I think. So I appreciate you having me on there, and anyone should check out all of your other amazing works, and also to promote myself, Genuine Chit Chat.
Yes, please
come over
and.
Come to Genuine Chit Chat on Instagram, Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube, and Alison has been on 3 episodes, 2 focusing around her and Reburn, and 1 focusing around childbirth and pregnancy. They're 2 great places to start if you want to find out. If you think that Alison's Where I'm From's, they're great, but you want to hear more from Alison, come to my show. You'll get like 5 or 6 hours, 5-ish hours.
You'll get hours of content. And really, after that pregnancy, I'm laughing too, because the pregnancy thing, I think you did say an hour and a half, and it was like 2.5 hours. And I did book 2, and I thought, 2, like this will be, no, wasn't enough. And it was such an in-depth conversation. And Tanya actually did ask if there was talking about throw up in it. I don't really think there was talking about throw up in it. But it was a very deep conversation. And I was grateful for the opportunity to reflect on pregnancy and childbirth, because my kids are older and it's not something I really think about much anymore, but it is a formative experience for anyone who's been through it. And it's worth taking a moment to like go, hey, you did that. That was good.
You literally created life inside you. It's not something to be shortchanged. It's a phenomenal thing that I cannot comprehend, but I appreciate, and that's one of the reasons I want to speak about. I was like, I know very little about this, so let's have 2 experts who've actually been through this thing, and then some other people write in and tell us their experiences, and try and normalize talking about these things. And as you and Ria both eloquently put, me paraphrasing this, is there's every pregnancy has its complications, and it's just about getting through it and not knowing what to expect, but realizing that if something doesn't go exactly to plan, you don't necessarily have to panic immediately. There's ways to think about things, and everyone's pregnancy experience is so completely different. And partners have to be aware of that. So it was one of those things. I was like, I don't know much about this, so I want people to tell me about it. And that's part of my sort of MO, just talking to people who are passionate about things and people who know more about things than me.
It's a great MO. So everyone go check out Genuine Chit Chat or More Poems from Where I'm From. And thank you so much for joining me, Mike. This was a joy. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
And thanks for everyone listening. Bye.
Bye.